Welcome to the Texas Oil and Gas Podcast, the show dedicated to bring you the news from the oil patch deep in the heart of Texas, with your hosts, Ryan Ray and Josh Shelton.
And we're back with the Texas Oil and Gas Podcast. This is episode 144. I'm your host, Josh Shelton, friend and co-host Ryan Ray. Ryan, we've been all over the news this week, man. We've been Russian news, American news, pronunciation news. We've all over the place.
We are prophets.
Well, I mean, let's just be honest here. Anyone who just stops and thinks about some of the stuff that we said last week, it wasn't like we were, using quantum physics or, advanced thought processes to go, hey, wait, how do the Russians make money? Wait, what's the Democratic policy? Wait, that goes hand in hand. So I still have not seen the mainstream media actually make that connection, but they did announce, I think, that Byrne is working with the Russians or Russians with Byrne or whatever. So no real surprise from this show, Josh, as we are always the leaders in the greatest ideas ever espoused. We can't actually say what we think. We struggle with that. But when we say it, it's right.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. So, Josh, speaking of that, so I purchased. We got a review to read, so let's read that first. Informative. It's a 5-star review from Boo Paycom. Boo Paycom.
Boo Paycom.
Yeah, it's probably some kind of like bend over type deal, and I'm not reading it right. But okay, so we tried. Informative and entertaining. I'd recommend this to anyone in the oil and gas industry, as well as those who want to learn the basics. These guys are knowledgeable and provide good context for discussions. Thank you, Boo. So with that, Josh, I purchased R Global almost a year ago now, a little bit over a year. So this is my first time doing taxes as the owner. I've had some small LLCs, but never had the tax complexities that I'm doing now, and it's frustrating. And so one of the ways that I vent my frustration is by making fun of you, which is quite easy and neat. And so I thought for our listeners, it's tax season for them as well. And so why not give them an outlet? So here's what we're going to do. We're going to run a tax season special, which if you leave us a 5-star review and you roast us, mainly Josh, but if you roast us, then we will have a winter. See, I can't even speak. Mm-hmm. We'll have a winner, and we'll announce the winner, and we're playing with some new logos. I put a new logo design up the other day, and we're looking at some different logos for the show. So we'll have some swag we'll give away for the winner of the roast contest, and that will be announced on 4/20. So I'll let you figure out all the implications there. Tax day is 4/15. We're not having an episode, so they got to be in by 4/15. We'll announce the best roast winner by 4/20. This is your chance to tell Josh how you really feel about him, preferably. Mainly for Josh.
No, it's not for me. I've gotten my fair share over the last 2 weeks with the...
Vaca, Merca.
Yeah.
Vaca Merca.
Yeah.
That French talk. So anyways, if you want to let us know something humorous, something funny, 5-star review, we will have some kind of swag giveaway on the 4/20 episode of this year. And, which reminds me, our 3-year anniversary is coming up, Josh. What's that, next week? Something like that?
3 years. That's
Should
crazy.
be, March 2nd, March 3rd.
Yeah, so 3-year anniversary coming up here just around the corner. And so, so we got our reviews in. So if you want to leave a review, you want to win some swag from the Texas Oil and Gas Podcast, we'll be working on that. Again, it's a roast format, so if you leave a 5-star review and you talk about how great I am, then we would appreciate that, but it won't enter you into the contest, the roast. And if you have an old one, you go back and update it. As long as iTunes shows us, then we'll enter you in as well.
Well, Ryan, in news this week, there was a report that Ryan Sitton put out about flaring. We're going to link this in the show notes. We're not going to go too much over the report. It's 13 pages, lots of information there. But a lot of the news this week centers around this report that Sitton released. So Texoga, they have an article where they talk about the flaring report, and they have some interesting comments. Along with a couple of things happened this week. With one was a Republican senator. Talks about flaring and the environment and trying to strike a balance. And then, we have another article with Bloomberg where the guy was critical of Sitton's report. So, Ryan, we want to jump in and kind of talk about all those kind of together and see I mean, what did you think about it? I mean, the report that Sitton put out and the response is being coming from Texoga and Bloomberg. What do you think about it?
Yeah, I think if you look at Texoga, they're essentially saying that we need more information, and I think on some level that's probably the closest to where I would be in these positions. If you listen to Senator Cornyn, what he says is basically he wants DC out of the way. He wants the local regulatory bodies to be involved, and so I think that's probably obviously closer than to where we'll be. And so before we kind of deal with the Bloomberg piece and the article from about Pioneer talking about it, I think that we should kind of tease out a few things here. But so if we don't clearly say this later on, we're making it clear now. And so let's just remove the word flaring and let's just put nuclear waste in there. Okay. And so if someone was dumping nuclear waste into the river upstream from us, Josh and Ryan and Nate and probably everyone listening would want the government to make them stop doing that. Whether that's to an avenue for a civil lawsuit or a criminal lawsuit or whatever it might be, we'd want the government to help us from stopping that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that has to be considered into some of these comments that were made, because if you don't put some context on it, it kind of sounds like you're not dealing with everything, and that's the critique that we're going to make of some of these posts, is that they're not dealing with some of the larger contextual issues here. And so if you go to the Bloomberg piece, and we'll link to all this in the show notes, so you can kind of go read this yourself. The Bloomberg piece essentially is saying that, the headline reads, Texas tackles its gas problem with whataboutism. And one of the things it points out is that Commissioner Sitton said that that Texas is doing better than Iran and Iraq. But that's not really something to brag about. Well, Josh, okay, so let's just concede that point, that us being more environmentally friendly is not over Iran and Iraq is not something to brag about. Okay, well, sure. However, if we make policies that hurt our oil-producing entities, not our gas-producing entities, because we're talking about oil-producing entities who are flaring off gas, right? So it's not the natural gas companies we're talking about here. It's the oil-producing companies who happen to have natural gas, and they can have a diversified business and all that, but I'm saying that they don't want it. That's why they're flaring it off. If we hurt those companies through regulation, who benefits from that?
Other countries like Iran and Iraq are going to fill in the gap.
And we're agreeing that they are worse than us already. So everyone agrees with this, that they're worse with the flaring problem than us. So we all agree there. There's no one's disputing that, I think. But what's being omitted is that if we reduce the oil that we put on the market, it's possible that Iran and Iraq could fill those gaps and that they are worse at it. So that's the first thing to consider is okay, would you want the people who are best at polluting, or not best at polluting, how would you say that? The
most conscientious about it.
Yeah, the most conscientious about polluting to do the most of that type of work. So they're going to do it the best, or the least, or however you want to phrase that. They're being the most effective at reducing pollution compared to other countries. So wouldn't you want those people to do the lion's share of the work because they're going to be more environmentally responsible than Iran and Iraq, right?
Yep.
Okay. So when you say that it's whataboutism, okay, well, sure, it is whataboutism, but also you just can't omit the fact that regulating our industry could allow those countries to increase their foothold and they flare more. So you've reduced U.S. people who were trying to be the most responsible, or the most responsible compared to everyone else, at least in the oil and gas industry, and then you allow the people who are least responsible to do it, and you didn't allow them by free market nature. You allowed them by a self-imposed regulatory device through the Railroad Commission or the state or the federal government. So that seems to be omitted from this part of the conversation, and I don't know why. And again, go back to nuclear waste. We're not saying that you shouldn't have a conversation about it, but it seems to me that when you talk about these issues, they're very narrowly focused, and I don't have a good reason for why people omit those things, but maybe you do. I don't know.
Well, there's one of the things that I thought about. It's similar to the argument we made last week that if we ban fracking, like some of the Democratic candidates are proposing, if we were to ban fracking, who's going to benefit from that? Well, it's going to be OPEC or these other Russia, these other countries, and there's the idea that seems to be this misconception that if we ban fracking in the United States, that means that fracking is going to be banned internationally, all over the world, which is just not the case. And I think when we look at some of these environmental issues, if you ban or you if the regulatory things are become too strict, and it de-incentivizes people to drill for oil, that's going to give opportunities to these other countries. So one of the questions that I would have is, this conversation and this argument might change a little bit if there was an international entity that governed all countries on how they handled flaring or how they drilled for oil. Of course, that is the worst possible thing I could imagine, having an international agency with that much power. But if there were, it would change the argument, because then you would say, if we could ban fracking and across the world, you would have a serious decline in carbon emissions or methane emissions, or depending on how you want to measure it. Now, that would be the worst possible thing I think that the world could do, because it would put us back into the Stone Ages. But you see what I'm saying, Ryan? I think that the fact that this is a international not an international mandate, it's just for this country, that people are failing to realize how the free market is going to respond to the United States being taken out of the, at least squeezed, and other opportunities are going to come in. But with some of these opportunities, there are companies that have actually gotten themselves into a position where they are being more responsible than some of the others with flaring. And so they see an opportunity now as well to capitalize on their investment into their infrastructure and the ability to not flare as much.
Yeah. One thing I should note is the author of the Bloomberg opinion piece does theorize that Iraq and Iran do not necessarily have the ability to pick up a lot of spare capacity. Now, that's an argument that has been touted out there, and I've asked various people about who has spare capacity, who doesn't, and I don't have a good grasp on that. I'm sure there's folks out there who do, but to be fair to the author, he doesn't. So when we're saying Iran and Iraq would pick up the space, he doesn't necessarily think that that's a viable argument because they don't have the spare capacity. But I'm not sure if he's right. Maybe he is, maybe he's not. The other thing would be is that there's other countries that, you look at what's happening in Libya right now, and other OPEC nations that, you incentivize them as the price of oil goes up to potentially roll back their self-imposed regulations to do that. So I did want to point that, just to be fair to the author there, that he does make the point that he doesn't think they have it. Well, he doesn't say that he doesn't think they have it. He thinks it's questionable, and so keep that in perspective. But yeah, an overarching, if you look at like the Paris Climate Agreement, it's how many people actually fall on that, who's being held accountable, who's holding who accountable to that. Those are all fair questions to ask if you're going to be involved in an international agency, because we don't want Germany coming over and sanctioning the United States of America for not meeting some kind of flaring regulatory deal, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right, and so that's ultimately I think what you're saying. And the other side of the coin is you have you're starting to see a growing sentiment here. And listen, I think Spiegner, we're working on the Spiegner Prophet of Doom series, so we'll be updating on that hopefully next couple of weeks. But Spiegner even has said that we need to do something with the flaring, and obviously he is as an oil and gas investor is financially motivated to see that happen. But Pioneer has really been a champion of this, and so here's what I would say, Josh, is when the oil and gas companies are coming out and saying, hey, we want to see the regulatory agency now act, to go ahead and put in these stopgaps, these measures, I just have to presume that they either A, have the ability to, put the gas in a pipeline already, and so they're not concerned about it, or B, they feel like they can make enough margin, they can do it within a short amount of time. So it's not a concern for them. On the flip side, if someone said, well, I'm for the flaring problem being solved in 10 years to the day, so whatever today is, the 24th, February 24th, 2030, I'm in favor of that. Well, I think it's fair to ask those people, will they be around in 10 years? They may be getting ready to retire, and so for them, 10 years is a way of saying that they're serious about it, but they're really not serious about it because they're going to retire in 10 years. they might be serious about it. They may take 10 years for them to do it. But so I think when you look at the companies and what they're saying, that there's a financial, they are financially motivated to make the statements that they're making. And so you have to be careful to say, okay, well, Pioneer's saying it, therefore it must be true. Well, Pioneer's, they want you to invest in their stock, and this regulatory, these rules would actually help them, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's kind of hard to take the lead and say, well, yeah, we're in favor of it. The company that's barely struggling, barely making it, and they might go out of business, but they die on the hill of changing the flaring rules. Okay, well that could be respectable. And so here's kind of what I wanted to paint, the picture I wanted to paint. Make sure I'm not missing anything here. Let's walk through this. Let's say, just for argument's sake, that the price, keep the math easy, the price of WTI is $50 a barrel. The price of natural gas is $1. Okay. And the Railroad Commission comes out tomorrow and says you cannot flare gas. You have to put it in a pipeline, or don't drill, whatever. Yeah, but you can't flare it anymore. No more flaring. No more flaring waivers are be given. What happens is a couple things. I guess you have some people who violate the rule, potentially if they're right in the middle of nowhere. That'd be a small percentage, but probably they'll probably run the risk. Then you'll have two camps really. One camp will be the camp that shuts down because they just can't afford it. So they're going to quit drilling, slow down drilling because they just can't afford to do it. And the other camp is the camp that's going to put the barrels on the market. So, I mean, not the barrels, the gas on the market. When you put the gas on the market, who does that help and who does that hurt? It would seem to hurt the companies that are natural gas companies in, the Haynesville, because now you're going to put more gas on the market and you're going to hurt companies in the Haynesville because they're having to deal with the fact that you're putting more natural gas into the market, and it could lower the price. The price could theoretically stay the same depending on how many companies stop. You get into some there's unanswered questions that we can't answer and no one can answer because we don't know how it's going to play out. But it's possible that the market goes, okay, well, you're putting in so much natural gas now because you're having to pipe it that the price of natural gas goes down to 50 cents. Okay, the other thing that could happen is let's just say in a hypothetical, all of the companies quit drilling for oil because they can't afford it. So there's not enough margin there, they can't afford it. Okay, so that natural gas comes off the market, which means the natural gas price is going to go up, right? And the oil price is going to go up. Well, whoever has spare capacity is going to try to take advantage of that, whether that's Iraq, Iran, OPEC, or whatever. But there's a certain threshold that it would take until the oil producers come back on. But when the oil producers come back on, they come back on, and now they're going to have to pipe the natural gas. So again, you'd have companies in the Haynesville, let's say, who are trying to figure out when are these oil companies going to come back and start drilling again, and try to balance out their drilling schedule to make sure that they don't lose a lot when all this natural gas comes back on the market. So essentially what we're trying to say more or less is be careful what you ask for. It's not that this isn't a problem that should be considered and dealt with, but it feels like the folks that are saying, hey, we want to regulate it now, it's like, okay, well, there's just implied consequences when you start messing with the market, and we can't foresee that. And so just be careful when you say, hey, we want to stop flaring. Okay, if you stop it, who's talking about those implications and how that's going to pan itself out? And those are the conversations that are very difficult. They're very nuanced. They take a lot of time, and they're not being had on any real level. And that's the thing that's frustrating is it's like, well, Pioneer come out and said, yeah, we want to stop it. Right. Okay, I'm sure you do. What do you care about the folks that are over here and how it's going to impact them? And the Bloomberg author points out that this is a shared responsibility because you're polluting the atmosphere with the natural gas, so it's a shared responsibility. Okay, well, if it's a shared responsibility to pollute it, when you put it into a pipeline, it's a shared responsibility for the economic impact of the nation. So you can't make the argument that polluting it is a shared cost because we're all going to have to pay more for whatever, air conditioning, heating, cooling, whatever, because of the environmental impact. But then if you take it out of if you put it into the market and you lower the price and people lose their jobs, that's also a shared economic cost. So no matter what you do, there's an economic cost. And so it feels like folks kind of flatten it out and try to act like one reality is true, but the other reality doesn't even exist. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm.
Well, there's a lot going on, and that's the thing with the market is that if you go in and start tinkering with something, it can have, like you said, consequences. I mean, if they were to force this gas to be put into a pipe and not flared, that may raise the break-even price on oil. And I know we don't necessarily like the term break-even price, but
Sure.
it just in general,
right.
it's going to raise that price.
It's going to cost more.
It's going to cost more, and that is going to have an impact on how oil is produced. It's going to increase the price of energy in general, and it's just all sorts of things that are not being talked about, that are not necessarily being addressed. Partly because we don't know exactly what the impact would be, but partly because we don't. A lot of the people that talk about these things don't want to address some of those facts on the other side. And one of the interesting things here is, for reference, Pioneer is actually saying that if they can't drop their flaring rates below 2% of gas produced, that they think that these investors in public shares should not do business with the company and sell whatever stocks you have. So Pioneer is calling for a specific number, probably one they've already mastered, and they want you to sell your stocks and get completely out of it if you can't hit that number. And I think for them it's just an opportunity, because they realize the importance of some of these optics and are just trying to have aligned themselves with it, and now want to say, well, look, I've spent $100 million on building out infrastructure. There's no reason that these people should be able to continue doing it if I had to spend all this money.
Yeah, and I would just simply submit to Mr. Sheffield that, if I can pull this up here real quick, if you go back to, let's see here, this is going to be, I think, 2.5 years ago. Let me pull it up. Let's see here. Yeah, this is it right here. So if you go back to July 21st of 2017, their share was at $161, and then by September 1st, it was down to $130. I believe that's the right time period I'm talking about. I can go back and look it up. Listener might know. And what happened was they had a bad quarterly earnings call, and they were behind on their schedule. If this is the right one, someone can correct me if it's not. But you can go back and look it up. They had like a $20, $30 price drop overnight. So the question would be, is Mr. Sheffield, do you believe that investors should pull their money out when a company gets behind schedule in their drilling program? Do you think that investors, are you calling for your investors to divest their stock in you when you don't hit your goal? Well, the answer is going to be, I think it's a pretty simple one. What do you think he's going to say? He's probably saying, probably no. Probably no. And so, again, so Mr. Sheffield's welcome to come on and respond to that. And it's, again, it's not, is it a one-to-one or anything like that? No, but it's simply saying that it's financially advantageous. Because if you're willing to invest in oil and gas companies, and you say, well, this is the criteria, well, then if Pioneer magically fits that criteria, well, then, who's going to get that money? Well, Pioneer would, because they match this magical criteria. So listeners, would love to hear some folks. I know some feedback on this. I know we have a lot of folks who probably have a strong opinion on the flaring stuff, kind of like the water stuff and other stuff we talked about. It's a robust discussion, I think, is what we're saying. Maybe we should do Josh. Maybe we should do like a big energy panel or something, and do like an hour-long talk and get some folks to come on and talk about the pros and the cons. Because ultimately, I think to summarize everything we're saying is, no matter what you do, if you let it go as it is, no matter what you do, there's going to be things that are going to happen, and we can't fully recognize those. When you regulate it, the law of unintended consequences will come into play. And so 2 years from now, we'll be going, oh my gosh, we regulated this, and we didn't, maybe stuff that Josh and I are even considering, or other folks are considering, like, oh my gosh, wow, okay, this is happening now. So now we got to go regulate that. And so next thing you know, you're at a point to where you've changed exactly how the market works. And I know folks like Speakner and other folks that are really smart that are saying, hey, we need to go ahead and regulate now. And I think it's a discussion worth having. It's just help me understand, how do you plan to deal with these other impacts? Because it's not just stopping flaring is going to fix all the problems. It causes new problems, and how do we address those problems? Because what I don't want, what Josh don't want for sure, is to say, well, good gosh, these oil and gas companies can't make money. The government needs to subsidize them now. Right? They can't afford to do it, so the government needs to subsidize it. Well, we don't want that either. And you might be laughing, going, that's a crazy outcome. Well, crazier things have happened, but it's possible. It's a possible trajectory. So,
all right, today we have Ted Hall. He's now the VP of Market Strategy for Kayrros. Ted, we've been looking forward to getting you back on the show for a while, man. We got a lot of good feedback last time we had you on, so glad to have you on the show today.
That's great to hear, and it's great to be back. And happy Mardi Gras to you guys.
Hey, there you go. So, Ted, let's get into the question that everyone wants to know the answer to. How many ducks are on the pond? And the second part would be is we had you on August, I believe, last year. You guys kind of
Yep.
broke the news of, hey, the duck numbers are overinflated. I saw y'all had an article I
Yep.
linked to on LinkedIn that October you felt that those numbers were rising some, but let's kind of take that back. August, do you feel like what you came on the show and said August was y'all have revalidated that and kind of y'all's methodology? You're still confident in all that. None of that's changed, I'm assuming. So kind of walk us through what's happened and changed since August.
Absolutely. That is still the case. I think if you're looking at the EIA drilling productivity report numbers for ducks, they're certainly much higher than what's in reality. We're still not exactly sure on the EIA's end what's driving that. But it's if you're looking at that as a baseline number, for sure, it's much higher than reality. Now, I will say, throughout 2018 and when we first spoke, ducks had been, from our point of view, almost completely operational. They'd held steady in the Permian at about 1,000 for the entire year. Wells drilled, wells completed were roughly the same depending on the month. But in 2019, we actually saw a pretty significant build in ducks. So versus what we saw at the end of 2018, ducks are up almost 50%. So there has been a change. I think if you're watching the EIA numbers, we've actually diverged from them again.
They're going down and you're going up.
Exactly. So I think if you look December to December, the EIA number's a little lower than ours. They still have a build, but over the course of the year, we saw a build while they saw it coming down. So there are a couple of drivers to that. I think part of it's just an increase in activity among some operators. We saw some builds in ducks among individual operators, especially in the Permian, the majors for sure. Exxon and Chevron both saw pretty significant builds in ducks. But I think what we've gotten back to when we look at drilling and completion efficiency gains, that's really what we think is the driver for this. So in the Delaware, for example, operators are drilling and completing wells 11 days faster year over year in the fourth quarter of 2019. But most of that gain has been on the drilling side. So 8 days faster on drilling and just a few days faster on completion. So when you look at an aggregate, that's part of what's driving the inventory for sure.
So let me ask this real quick, and you may have addressed this last time, I don't remember. Are y'all measuring the ducks for the other basins outside the Permian?
We sure are. So we
how does that go with the EIA? Do y'all find the same kind of results there that it's I get what you're saying about the Permian, the difference in the EIA, but do you find the same type of results where, if you're the Bakken or wherever you're at, that you and the EIA are still far apart on your numbers?
I wouldn't say they're far apart. I mean, part of that is just the magnitude, the number of wells being drilled and completed. So anything that happens in the Permian is going to be more dramatic. But in the oil, so we cover all the biggest oil basins. So the Permian, the Eagle Ford, the Williston, and everything in the Anadarko, and then when in the DJ we call it, but really, I mean, that's DJ, Powder, Piceance to some extent. So across those basins, we saw increases in ducks throughout 2019. Except in the Anadarko. The Anadarko is the only spot where we saw a decrease in ducks. But for example, in the Williston, we saw a year-on-year increase in December of 65 ducks. And again, like in total well numbers, that's not a whole lot, but in percentage terms of what's in inventory, it is significant. But all of that, 63 of those 65 were ExxonMobil wells. So some of that's, we're not sure whether that's increases in drilling efficiency on their side, or whether it's a strategic build in ducks, or if there's some kind of operational bottleneck where they're having trouble getting those wells completed as quickly as ideal cash flow might prefer.
Well, and it's important, those things you brought up there when you talk about ducks, is that we don't know, no one knows why I say no one. We don't know why the ducks in general are here or not here. It's kind of hard to always understand from a company to company why they're doing what they're doing. There's a lot of different reasons why company X might build ducks or company Y might not have ducks. And so I think that's part of the thing when we talk about the ducks on the show, we like to point out is it's just not as simple as saying, well, the ducks are going up, the ducks are going down. That's part of the discussion. But the driver of the ducks, if you will, is the unknown. And that makes it hard to really figure out what to think about whether the ducks are going up or going down.
That's exactly right. I think the important message to drive home for anyone who's relying on the publicly available duck data, what you get from the EIA, is there isn't a big overhang of supply waiting to come online. Operators don't have thousands of DUCs that if we get $100 oil tomorrow, that they're going to turn all those online. The reality is the vast majority of DUCs are purely operational. They're just waiting to get those completed as quickly as possible to turn into cash flow. Again, there are exceptions to that, whether they're strategic or just operational bottlenecks. But the message everyone should take away is generally operators want to turn their wells to sales. And there's some, especially in the Northeast, you might do strategic builds for, waiting for pipeline constraints to come off. But generally, operators want to make money on their wells, and the best way to do that is to turn them to sales.
So I'm gonna throw you a curveball here. You might not have the answer to this. I don't know. I'm just you mentioned something a minute ago about the Delaware Basin. We've been talking on this show a lot about the flaring, and if you want to regulate flaring, there's a lot of potential impacts to that. I'm curious, do y'all look at the wells that maybe have a higher gas to oil ratio, or do you see more DUCs in those areas, less DUCs? Do you actually measure that at all as part of what you're doing? Because I'm wondering if some of these DUCs could come from spots where there's just a lot, there's a higher gas ratio, so folks are like, you know what, we're going to pump the brakes on these wells because we can't make as much on these because of a high gas ratio here.
We haven't studied that deeply. We have not noticed a big correlation there. I think operators have certainly not shied away from flaring, and the Railroad Commission has not necessarily held them accountable on that. And so on the margin, that wouldn't surprise me, but we haven't studied it.
No. Yeah, like I said, that's just, I was thinking, because you mentioned some stuff earlier, I was wondering if there was any data on that. Now, you did say ExxonMobil, and I know you guys, obviously, we're linked to y'all stuff, and y'all sell proprietary data, so I don't want you to give away all the house goods, but I am curious, just from a high level, you did mention ExxonMobil. When you think about DUCs in general, how much is it company specific, without giving away all the companies and what they're doing, but just how much is that when you look at this, you go, okay, well, you can almost bet that this company is going to have a higher percentage of DUCs, because on the show we've had Deloitte and various folks, and one of the things that seems to be a recurring theme is that if you look at how productive wells are, that the drilling team, how effective they are at fracking the well, that drives a lot of that. I'm wondering if you can sense any trends when you come to DUCs, if the management team behind it, the drilling team behind it, however you want to phrase that, produces more DUCs or less DUCs.
I mean, it's really a case-by-case thing. We see different behaviors among operators. If we're drilling down into the Permian, we saw an increase in DUC inventory across the operators with the biggest levels of activity. So any independent E&P you might think of with a large level of activity in the basin, we saw a small increase in DUCs over the course of 2019. But the majors were the big drivers in increases in every basin. As far as what we see in operational efficiency that could drive that, it really, what we're monitoring and what we have a good grasp on is drilling and completion efficiency. So how many days per well, normalized to 10,000 feet is the way we look at it, but how many days per well it takes to drill and complete wells. And across the board, operators are getting faster. And that's the reason, as we saw drilling and completion activity drop significantly over the course of last year, down I think across the basins, down 50% year on from June 18 down to the end of last year. But we didn't see completions fall off nearly that dramatically. The number of wells that bring online, they are down, especially when you look across the U.S. But in the Permian specifically, we didn't see completions fall off till the fourth quarter, even as we saw activity drop off substantially. And all that speaks to how much better operators are getting operationally, where with every crew they have is both drilling and completing wells faster year on year. And again, it's 11 days faster in the Delaware. That is a significant gain. And there's a limit to the marginal benefit there is going to decrease. I think that's the reason in the Delaware we see bigger increases than we saw in the Midland. I think the Midland's a more mature basin, so it's the operational efficiency gains are harder to come by. So at some point that's going to slow. But for now, Delaware operators have been much faster. And we saw the same in Anadarko. Now, Anadarko operators had a lot more room for improvement. I think their total for drilling completion total days was close to 60 at the beginning of last year, and they've cut that down significantly. But again, they had a lot of room to improve.
So last year we were talking about a falling rig count, and eventually the rig count has to fall and level off, and the supply would drop. But if these efficiencies keep improving, the rig count can keep falling. Do y'all have any sentiment of, how much lower the rig count can go before you kind of get back to where we were? Because the rig count used to be kind of a metric that was, everyone kind of looked at, and it meant different things to different people, how it affected their business. But what I'm hearing you say is, man, the rig count really is being almost diminished to the point to where we're not. It doesn't have the same impact as it used to because they're continually increasing their efficiencies.
Right, and I think part of that's the rig count was all we had looking back 3-4 years ago, right? So now that we can look at the whole picture, you start to see the little differences. But yeah, even going back to 2014, seeing the relationship change between the output you get from one rig versus what you get from a rig drilling today. It's night and day. The increase in efficiency was dramatic, but yeah, you have to, now that we have all this data available, we can drill down to, okay, the rigs are this efficient, and now fracs are getting more efficient, and then how quickly can they turn those wells to sales? Which that continues to be a really volatile number. How quickly operators can get from completion to sales, and then it still leaves a big variable as far as real time. When we talk about drilling completion, we're monitoring that in real time, but we still have to wait for productivity numbers. So, what we see in West Texas, much lower activity, but completions staying strong, but starting to fall. We haven't seen in the balances show up that production is falling as much as it even should with the lower completion numbers. So it leaves the question, how much better are operators getting on well productivity? So even with the gas oil ratio problems you've alluded to before, are they improving there? Because I think if you're just looking at rigs, you would say production should be falling substantially. But even though we know completions are higher than you might expect if you're just looking at rigs, production's still not falling as much as we expect it should, at least looking at the Midland balances the way we do.
Right. So you've touched on the Eagle Ford a couple times. Eagle Ford's it was the sexy girl to dance a few years back. Now it's kind of the ugly stepsister that no one talks about. Let's give the Eagle Ford some love and tell folks what's going on down there. What are some trends that you've guys seen, and maybe some things that might surprise some folks that if they're not following the Eagle Ford as closely as the Permian, which gets the lion's share of the news now, it feels like.
Yeah, so in the Eagle Ford, it's as I talked about the Midland before, it's an even more mature basin, so efficiency gains are a little harder to come by. In fourth quarter 2018, we had total drilling completion time a little under 30 days per well. Again, that's normalized to 10,000 feet. Those have come down 4 or 5 days, so they are getting faster. Most of that was on the completion side. That's one basin where they're not necessarily drilling much faster; they're completing much faster. And then on the DUC side, we've seen a small increase, 43 DUCs year on year, which, again, it's a pretty small number, but that's a 10% increase in the total number of DUCs.
So the final question, I guess, unless Josh has anything, and then we'll circle back around to what you guys do and make sure you plug all that. If you look at the API, I think last June, something like that, said that we had 6 months of inventory in DUCs. Obviously, they're using the EIA DUC inventory data to say that. So they had 6 months of inventory data, and that felt like the traders and the people who deal in the market side of things, they were kind of leaning on that number. You guys are saying it's a lot less. So if it's not 6 months of supply that are in the DUCs, do you have a reasonable estimate of, if all production stopped today, how much production is in the DUCs according to y'all's numbers?
Just back of the envelope, it's certainly not 6 months. It'd be closer to, just looking at it here, closer to 1 month, maybe a little more. It's depending on, if the operational level is 1,000 and you're completing between 300, 400 a month. This is just talking about the Permian. Then I guess you can get up to 3 months technically. But I think that would be a bit of a stretch. The reality is operators completing wells generally as quickly as they can. And if we stopped drilling tomorrow, we'd run out of wells to complete pretty quickly.
Okay, so we'll say 2 to 3 months is 3 months is being really generous. 2 months might be somewhat generous, but somewhere it's not 6 months. which is a big difference.
No,
Yeah.
there's that would be very surprising.
Okay, so we talked a lot about ducks. Why don't you tell people what else you guys do, what services you offer, if y'all have got conferences or reports or whatever. Let's go ahead and get all that information out there now.
Sure. So, I mean, I think, and some of your customers might be familiar already. Kayrros has been in the alternative data business for 4 years now. We generate intelligence around storage and around refinery maintenance. And then the C&P intelligence product I'm talking about today, we're monitoring every well drilled and completed in the oil basin. So we're monitoring 90,000 permitted wells every single week. So to get a real-time picture of what's going on in any of the oil basins, we're really the only source for that. But we're also really excited. We've actually just unveiled a new data analytics platform, calling it Kayrros Studio, that allows our customers to choose their own assets, and they can run our analysis on whatever they want, wherever in the world. So they can monitor the level of activity on any well pad in the entire world. So in addition to the basins we cover today, they could look at the gas basins, or I know the Vaca Muerta is a big favorite of you guys.
There you go, get him.
But our customers are already monitoring economic activity in China to check the impacts of the coronavirus. And then upstream, your listeners, upstream U.S. players, you can monitor pipeline right-of-way. You could do a 3D reconstruction of a sand mine, and you can even monitor methane emissions. So that's a relatively new development too. So monitoring methane from satellites is, a code we just recently cracked, and we're really excited about it. So and with this platform, for most of this analysis, a customer can do that with a couple of clicks.
Okay. And what was the website? What was the website again for that?
So that's Kayrros.com. That's Kayrros.
And the studio is inside of there.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay.
So we have our regular subscription products you can get through our portal, but then we also have the studio there.
Okay. Ted, now you mentioned real quick, I said last question, but I got to ask this. You said you do storage data. One of the things I've wondered is, just help me out here. If you look at the storage and, the EIA releases their storage data, should we consider, as the way the market evaluates the storage, to maybe how we monitored the price as relates to storage 3 to 4 years ago, 5 years ago? Should we maybe consider, that's how it used to be, but the way we bring barrels onto the market now is just fundamentally different, and kind of think about it in different terms, because it feels like the price is being held to that 5-year average. That 5-year average, the way we produce oil, is just not the same as it is anymore. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think you're asking a good question. I think, but as far as relating storage to price, fundamentals matter. As an analyst, and that's reassuring to me as an analyst. Supply, microeconomics matters, and supply demand balances matter. The catch is, I think if you look back 3 or 4 years ago, all we had is what was publicly available, where you could just look at the EIA, some European storage, Japanese storage on a weekly basis, but the rest, you kind of have to depend on what the IEA is publishing, and you kind of just hope it's right. And a lot of those are estimates. What we're able to provide today is visibility on previously unseen areas, specifically China. And when you get that full global picture, we see a really strong correlation between Brent and Brent spreads, and therefore TI and TI spreads, with what's changing on a weekly or biweekly basis on storage. And that it really took this technology to crack that. So if we're monitoring, we get weekly revisits in China on our global inventories. And without that, you'd really be flying in the dark. And we were until today. And sitting on trading desks before I came to Kayrros, that was exactly the case. Is the EIA is showing this, but the rest is kind of a question mark. What are Chinese SPR builds? What's going on in India?
Right.
And today we can show a lot of that.
Awesome. Okay.
And we have 90% coverage of floating roof storage capacity for crude.
Okay, great. If you want to export all that data and send it to Ryan at GoR2.com, that'd be much appreciated. I'll take a look at it.
Happy to help. Happy to help.
Ted, thank you so much for coming on the show again. It was good. We'll get you hopefully back on maybe mid-year as the coronavirus has hopefully died down. OPEC news will be March and then June, so hopefully we'll get you on to see where the ducks are at and what else is going on. Talk maybe a little storage inventory as well next time.
Anytime. Thanks, guys.
Appreciate it.
Big thanks to Ted Hall for coming on the show today. We've been looking forward to having him on the show for a while, so I'm glad we finally got him back on to discuss DUCs.
We were told by a listener a while back he is one of the smartest people that particular listener knew. So if you don't like listening to us two buffoons, Ted Hall is supposedly one of the smartest people you're going to meet. So
we endorse Ted wholeheartedly.
We endorse Ted. And if he's wrong, blame Ted. Yeah.
Then blame Nate.
Yes.
So for the Texas Roundup this week, we have quite a few things that have come out. One, state senate.
It's funny, Josh, that Steffi the intern's working now. That we have a lot. Have you noticed that, Nate? That Steffi the intern, we have a lot more news percolating now with Steffi the intern here. So go ahead, Josh. Just want to put that out.
I resent that statement.
I mean, maybe the news is picked up. Magically.
You rock, Stephanie.
Steffi the intern, just go ahead.
All right, so state senator calls for conversation about produced water. So we've talked a little bit about this. We produce a lot of water out in the Permian, and basically Perry is calling for innovations in technology so that we can take this and recycle the water and reuse it, especially in agriculture.
Was this the one who said he could drink it? Was that the article? Yeah, that's when he says right here. Read that quote.
There is a myth that produced water cannot be clean, Perry said, but what I saw this morning was clean to the point I would have been able to drink it.
I would like to see him drink it.
Yeah.
I would like to see him drink it.
He'd be like those cows glowing green.
We're all in favor of him drinking it.
Next one, Energy Transfer signs Eagle Ford Shale Permian Basin agreements. Let's see, they signed agreements with undisclosed company for the gathering, processing, transportation, and fractionation of NGL in the Eagle Ford Shale through 2034. Kinder Morgan CEO offers new guidance on Permian Pass pipeline. They're going to build the company's third pipeline to move natural gas from the Permian Basin of West Texas to the Gulf, but project may have to wait until more customers sign up. So kind of along some of the lines we were talking about, gas prices. Infographic. This was a cool infographic. The oil and gas outlook for 2020. Just going to link this in the show notes. Not a lot that I can say about it. They mentioned ESG, which is environmental sensitivity, where companies are looking at the environmental optics of a company to determine its value. So it mentions that. It talks a little bit about offshore operations in the Gulf, like we've talked about in the last few episodes, and how that is looking like it's going to thrive, and shale fields not so much. It also mentions the presidential election. Eagle Ford producer Lone Star achieves record growth in 2019. So Lone Star, they killed it in the Eagle Ford this year. Permian support grows for plan to eliminate routine flaring. So Oxy is the first U.S. oil company to endorse World Bank's initiative. I'm going to link to that in the show notes. Interesting stuff there. And then we have Endeavor. Phishing scam results in possible access to unsecured health data. So this was a bad day for Endeavor. They released a report. It says, discovered on January 14th, earlier that day, unauthorized party through a phishing scam possibly gained access to unsecured protected health information stored in the corporate Office 365 account. So I'm sure that was not a good day. Source Water offers dirt work alert as leading indicator of drilling activity. So this was a cool article. Looking at dirt work, they're going to say that future drilling activity is going to be monitored best by looking at dirt work alert. So if you want to check that out, we'll link to that in the show notes. It could be some new technology there.
Yeah, and before we get out of here, let's remember Roast Fest 2020 is up and going. So leave a 5-star review in the comments, and we will read your roast of Josh or Nate, whomever.
Or Ron.
You're the host, Josh.
Especially Ron.
You're the host. I'm not the host, so you're the host. So Roast Fest 2020 is alive and well. April 15th, we will reveal the Roast Fest 2020 winner. April 20th, and flaring comments, questions, concerns, or anything from Ted Hall's interview today, TexasOilAndGasPodcast.com. Send us in your feedback, and we'd love to hear more about it. Until next time, keep it on.